year at Mini University, I gave a talk on Brexit and Brexit. Any people here from last year? Excellent. Return audience. That's nice. And what happened last year after I gave my talk, the British decided to exit the EU. The Greeks are still in, but they may be on the edge of being out. Anyway, one of the topics that I had to explore was the effects of austerity programs, which had come as a consequence of both the policies of the countries in the EU and Euro system, and insistence by both the German government and other agencies like the International Monetary Fund that particularly the southern countries in the European Union adopt austerity plans. And there is a political reaction to that, and in fact a left-wing populist government was elected in Greece, which eventually had to dissolve itself and be replaced. But in any case, I got interested in the question of populism in general, and I decided when I was asked for a topic for this year, I'd talk about, in this case, right-wing populism, because that's been more in the news of late. How many of you have heard that word being used in the news or, yeah? And how many of you feel confident that you know what that means? Okay. Me neither. I mean, I remember when populism was about agriculture. I'm not that old, but I mean, I do remember that, and then we had our populists of the 30s who were basically connected with the Progressive Party. But the populists of the 19th century in the United States, that's people like William Jennings Bryan and the Cross of Gold and all that stuff. Free silver, I think, was part of the program. So anyway, I'm going to take off from that general topic of populism, and you'll see in a minute why. Okay. Well, didn't want to start there. Sorry. Yeah, I'll try not to make it grim. All right. So, according to the definition in where else, Wikipedia, populism is the quality of appealing to or identifying with ordinary people, not elites. And that very basic definition is pretty good because, in fact, most populism, both of the right and the left-wing variety, is anti-elitist. And that includes scientists, by the way. Scientists are part of the elite. So part of the anti-science thing that we've been seeing lately is part of this revolt against the elites. Right-wing populism is a political ideology that rejects the current political consensus and often combines ethnocentrism and anti-elitism. So there's the anti-elitism. The ethnocentrism does not tend to be there in left-wing populism. So here's the left-wing populism. The appeal to the common man is common to both. Left-wing populism is a political ideology which combines left-wing politics and populist rhetoric and themes. The rhetoric often consists of anti-elitist sentiments, opposition to the system, and speaking for the common people. So the common man, the common people, not that big a difference. And that's generally why people are called populists. They say, Main Street versus Wall Street. Main Street is the common people. And the 99% versus the 1%. So, you get the idea. Okay, so there's the scary slide. But these are the two guys who did very well among their base in the 2016 campaign. Obviously, this one is president. So, but they're good examples of left-wing and right-wing populism, given the definition I just gave you. Anybody want to argue with that? No? You don't? Sure? Okay. All right. That's right. You don't have to. So here's another scholar who has written many books on populism, Pat Muda. He's at, I think, the University of Iowa. But he's originally, I think, trained in Europe. I define populism as an ideology that considers society to be ultimately separated by two homogeneous and antagonistic groups, the pure people versus the corrupt elite. See, this has a little more edge to it as a definition. Yeah. And so does the rhetoric of the populace. You know, the corrupt elite obviously can't be good, and the pure people must be good. So, and that argue should be an expression of the volonté générale. He's using Rousseau there, the general will. So, in other words, there's a notion of an ideal for politics, that it should be an expression of people. And in many ways, this is a very basic democratic sentiment. So we have a very strange combination here of traditional democratic values, you know, the people should rule, with somewhat anti-democratic ideas of exclusion, of groups that merit, who deserve democracy, and those who don't. Those who are undermining democracy, that's those corrupt elites. And here's an image, by the way. This is supposed to be William Jennings Bryan, I guess. But he's a snake, and he's eating. He's the populist snake, and he's eating the Democratic Party. Yeah. And you know, that phenomenon was a very short-lived phenomenon. Was it 1870s or 1880s? Anybody know the dates? Okay. I'm not sure on the dates myself. I read up on it a little bit, and then I promptly forgot it. Okay. So, did I skip one? Yeah. Okay. So another argument is made that there are 5 key ideological elements to populism. First of all, you emphasize sovereignty of the people. Back to the general will, the people should rule, and that's a basic democratic value. That the leader should advocate for the people. That's got some other overtones to it, but anyway, the idea is that leaders should be representing the people, not elites, not special groups. Attacking the elites is a common element of populism. So you attack the elites in order to gain favor with the general public. And sometimes that includes ostracizing others that you don't consider to be part of the general public, and invoking the heartland. Now this has little echoes of fascism and Nazism, right? And so one of the feelings about populism is that first of all, it's not really democratic, and second of all, that it may lead to extreme positions not too dissimilar from the fascist and Nazi period. So, but we're not talking about this right now. I'm going to stick to Europe, and I'm going to stick to the European right-wing populist parties. Here is a list. Some of these are left-wing. Oops. Let me do that. Okay, so Podemos is a left-wing populist party in Spain. Syriza is sort of left-wing, mostly left-wing in Greece. The Five Star Movement, I'm not quite sure. Anybody know about the Five Star Movement? I think they're mostly left-wing. But there's also another one in Italy called I'll get it in a minute. We have in Britain, we start with our right-wing groups, the UK Independent Party, or UKIP. Anybody follow the recent elections in Britain? How did UKIP do?
They had no seats. Zero.
No seats, that's correct. Their percentage of the vote, did it go up or down? It went down. And the interesting thing is, the UKIP party people, half of them went to the Labour Party, half of them went to the Conservative Party. Yeah, there you go. So this sort of, the difference between the populists and the left-right, so here in the U.S. we had left and right-wing candidates for presidency. In the case of UKIP supporters, they went left and right when they left UKIP. In the Netherlands, we have the Freedom Party. In Germany, a smaller party in the rest called the Alternative for Germany. And in Austria, the Freedom Party. Those aren't the only ones. There are a few more, and I'll be talking about them in a minute. Oops. This thing is too sensitive. All right, so, yeah, okay. So, in 2009, this is what the share of the vote for these different parties was in elections for the European Parliament. So you probably all know, in Western Europe and the members of the European Union all get to send representatives to the European Parliament. And that's often an indication. So the parties campaign both at the national level and at the European level. And often the parties will send their weaker candidates to the European Parliament. But if there are people who can't get elected locally at the national level, sometimes they are more successful at the European level. The European level tends to be a little bit more diverse and pluralistic than the national level. And parties will sometimes hide their candidates for the future. They'll try them out with the European Parliament, and if they do well with the European Parliament, then they'll put them up for election for the national parliament. And in 2009, as opposed to 2014, UKIP actually went up considerably from 16% to 24%. The Freedom Party went up from 12 to 22. National Front of France went up from 6 to 20, almost 22, a very big increase. The Danish People's Party went up, Dutch Freedom Party went up. And the interesting thing is these parties at that point were called Eurosceptic parties, because often they had programs where they said, the European Union isn't good for us, either we need to modify the European Union or we need to get out. And that increase was seen as somewhat ominous for the European Union. Okay. I should use my own clicker. Okay, so here are opinion polls for the popularity of these different parties between January 2010 and July 2016. What would you say is the general trend here? Yeah, it's pretty obvious. So here's the Italian party that I couldn't remember the name of, the Five-Star Movement. I'm sorry, the Five-Star Movement is one of the populist parties, and the Northern League, the Lega Nord, is the right-wing populist party. The Austrian Freedom Party, again, the French National Front, Podemos, again, left-wing populist, AFD, Alternative for Deutschland, they're the Danish People's Party, and the Netherlands Party for Freedom. So, okay, here's, let's see, the one that's at the top is the Austrian Freedom Party, and they're going up to the 35% level in opinion polls. That's favorable opinion of the party. A pretty big jump for them. The black line is the Italy Five-Star Movement. They're going up. There's the Northern League in Italy. It goes up a little bit less. This one's kind of all over the place. That is, I'm not sure which one that is. It's hard to read this. Okay, but you get the general idea. It's trending up. And this is worrisome, and people are concerned about it. The question is, why does this happen? Anybody have any theories?
Immigration.
Immigration is a very big part of it. Any other theories?
Economics.
Economics is very good. Yeah.
Fake news.
Globalization. I don't know whether fake. Yeah, could be. I mean, just as we are exposed to a lot more sources of news because of the internet and other things, so are the Europeans. So yeah, the possibility for fake news is there. And also, what's the most recent controversy over interfering in elections?
Russians.
Aha! There you go. So the Russians have actually funded some of these parties. In the case of the recent French election, apparently the Russians provided some funds to Marine Le Pen and the National Front in France. We take another set of polls. These are voting intentions here. And the guy on the top here is the Polish party for, I forget what PIS stands for, but anyway, and this is the head of that party, Yaroslav Kaczynski. They're doing quite well there at 40% intend to vote for them. And let's see, this is the Dutch Freedom Party, PVV, and they're kind of holding steady at the 25 to 30 level. This is the National Front. You see a big increase from 2010. Anybody? Well, I'll get into that in a minute. The rest of this chart, I'm not really sure how to interpret it. It sort of says, they looked at supporters among three parties, the Swedish Democrats, the PVV in the Netherlands, and the Northern League in Italy. And they tried to figure out some of the demographic factors, and males do tend to be more favorable to populists than females. Higher education doesn't seem to be a big factor. And neither, in this case, does age seem to make that much difference. But we'll talk about that in a bit more. In any case, if you look over all those parties, where are the right-wing voting intentions and popularity the highest? France, Poland, and Austria. Somewhat lower in Germany and Italy, but still increasing support. Okay, I'm going to talk about specific parties for a little bit, just to give you a flavor of who the leaders of these parties are. Okay. This is Geert Wilders. He has platinum blonde hair, or platinum dyed platinum blonde hair, and he has been trying. Well, he's the founder of the party, first of all. He's taken a very strong anti-Islamic position. And for some reason, he seems to be particularly mad at Moroccans. I don't know why in the Netherlands an anti-Moroccan view would be. I guess there are more Moroccans there, but anyway, he favors a tax on head rags, and that's what he calls them. And but like a lot of right-wing populists in Europe, he's trying to distinguish himself from Nazis and fascists. And so he tends to, a lot of these parties are actually pro-Israel and try to expel their anti-Semites. They don't always succeed in doing that. But that's one of the things that, as I'll say later, Marine Le Pen did to distinguish herself from her father, who was the former head of that party. He was also convicted. He's actually convicted in Dutch courts of inciting discrimination against Muslims. They, I guess, have a law against inciting discrimination. Maybe we should take a look at that law. Anyway, he was convicted of doing that. And this party is doing pretty well. It gained seats in the 2017 elections. He did not win his bid to be Prime Minister of the Netherlands. He lost out to Mr. Rutters, is that his name? But he came close. And at the moment, he's sort of in the background, but that party has definitely got long-term prospects. This is the head of the Northern League in Italy, Matteo Salvini. He's been head of the party since 2013. He is an elected member of the European Parliament. He's strongly Eurosceptic and opposes illegal immigration. And in a sort of weird Italian twist, he supports the separation of northern Italy from southern Italy. Can any of you imagine why somebody would take a position like that? Economics is a big factor, so southern Italy is poorer, generally speaking. He also dislikes Rome intensely. So Rome is where all the elites stay most of the time. And so it's an anti-elite and anti-poverty position. And Padania, which is what they call northern Italy, that's the country they want to eventually have separate from the rest of Italy. He's a pro-Padanian. So Italy's had this north-south thing for a zillion years, so. Anyway, okay. This is the head of the Austrian Freedom Party. He very narrowly, he got 49 point something % of the vote in the last presidential election in 2016. Let's see. And in the second round, he lost by a little bit more, but basically. He opposes immigration, he opposes free trade and globalization. He's definitely a Euro-skeptic. So that party has been quite successful. Oops. No. Okay, there she is. This is Marine Le Pen, the head of the French National Front. Took over leadership from her father some years back. She tried to make the party more acceptable by separating away from racist and anti-Semitic members of the party. And in 2017, she was the main candidate in the second round of the French election. She was the main competitor with Emmanuel Macron. Okay, so we know that Macron won. He won by a good margin, which made everybody feel a lot better about all this. You know, this is a series of bad news followed by a recent bit of good news. Macron won the presidency. He had no party to speak. He has this party called something En Marche. I think it's France En Marche. And he doesn't have any members of French Parliament, so they just had a parliamentary election, and they won a lot of seats in the parliamentary election, which is kind of like the French voters are saying, okay, so we elected this guy to be prime minister. President. We elected him to be president, and now we have to give him members of parliament so he can actually get something done. So he's campaigning on a reformist position and obviously anti-Eurosceptic, pro-Europe, and for more liberal policies than are advocated by Marine Le Pen and the National Front. Okay, this is the guy, friend of Trump, who is was the head until very recently of the UKIP party, UK Independence Party. He played a huge role in getting the Brexit vote to be in favor of exit. He is a big admirer of Donald Trump and Steve Bannon, and one of the first people, I think he came over before the election, but also came after, to congratulate Trump. Trump, of course, wanted to go visit him when he was or he wants to go visit him as soon as he can. And he also supported Marine Le Pen. Currently works for Fox News, which I've never seen him on Fox. I haven't seen him, but yeah. Okay. So that's Nigel Farage. And actually, I think there's the relationship between him and Steve Bannon is fairly mutual. They copy each other and use each other's ideas. And there's been a lot of cross-influence between these two people. Okay. In Germany, again, a much weaker right-wing populist party, the Alternative for Deutschland. The chairwoman of the party since 2015 is Frauke Petri. She's anti-Muslim, wants to ban minarets. So, whenever there are mosques in Germany, the idea is they shouldn't be allowed to erect minarets. Actually, that's been an issue locally here in the United States. Somebody has filed some suit about the noise of muezzins in mosques, and we've had similar suits about very loud church bells. So I think that's within our tradition to have that kind of dispute. But anyway, here it's much stronger, and you probably all detected this line of thinking which says the Muslims are bad because they want Sharia law to be applied locally, right? Anybody here have a good sense of what Sharia law is? Well, it's the sort of conservative people in the Muslim religious community want a fairly strict interpretation of Islamic law to be applied, not just within the religious community, but also broader communities. And there are some places where there are separate Islamic courts, right? So this is not a totally fake issue, but it's definitely an issue that's been highlighted among certain elements of the populist movement. Okay, and she opposes existing immigration practices. So, has anybody been following the whole debate about immigration, particularly in Germany? What can we say about it?
It's very liberal.
Well, under Chancellor Merkel, Germany has accepted more immigrants, more refugees rather than anybody else. Okay, and I think did I have something about that before? No. Oh well. I'll show the cartoon first. Yeah. All right. So this is Trump. This is Le Pen. This is Wilders, and that's Edel. And it says, "Blonde ist das neue Braun." Any German speakers out there?
The new brown there.
Blonde is the new brown. You know, orange is the new black. But, you know, this is a topic we've been sort of circling around. To what extent is this frightening populism distinguishable from sort of fascist views of the 30s? And you know, it's still an active debate. Clearly, we don't have as much racism and anti-Semitism in these right-wing parties, but we do have some elements of anti-democratic sentiment, anti-elitism, of course, and other, you know, sort of exclusionistic, nationalistic policies, which are characteristic of both the Nazis and the fascists. All right. In recent elections, I've already discussed briefly the role, the UKIP role in the Brexit vote of June 2016. I felt really good about my talk, by the way, because I was telling people it was 50-50, could go either way, and there were some news reports which were much more optimistic about the outcome of that election, including the ones that the Conservative Party was reading. So, but anyway, Brexit vote passed, and we're still dealing with that. Have you been following what's been going on with the Brexit vote lately? I mean, with the Brexit process, right?
Well,
yeah.
Theresa May is getting beat up.
Well, she definitely got beat up in the last election. It wasn't just Brexit, of course, but definitely had something to do with it. Apparently, young people turned out this last election in very high numbers. A lot of young people who did not turn out for the previous election. And that had a big effect on the results, the final results of the election. And also, there's the question of, because the Conservative Party did not pick up seats in this last election, parliamentary election, first of all, they may have to rejigger the coalition. They're going to invite the Unionists from Northern Ireland in, which doesn't seem like a very stable solution for forming a majority coalition. But anyway, we'll see what happens with that. And then the question is, the whole idea of having the election was to have a bigger majority in order to have a better negotiation for Brexit. Well, that kind of gets blown out of the water. So, all right. Donald Trump's election in November 6, 2016. How many of you think this sort of the populist side of their election campaign was important in the victory? Oh, you did? Okay, good. Anybody think it wasn't important?
Yeah, I don't think so. You look at some of the statistics, and it doesn't necessarily support that.
Uh-huh.
I mean, you look at the wealth value of those who actually voted for Trump. It was much higher than anticipated.
Right.
And now tonight they're having a $10,000 a seat fundraiser in Wisconsin.
Right.
I mean, how many populists can afford $10,000 a seat?
Right. Yeah, another piece of evidence is the support for Trump and his party, well, the Republican Party, obviously, but on the part of business sector. And that's gone down a bit recently, but still pretty solid. And the stock market, where most of us are retired, right? So the stock market definitely took a nice jump after that election. I'm sort of wondering whether that was, what did,
Planned.
huh?
Planned.
Now, it's very hard to plan the stock market. Yes.
But the stock market had been
It's
rising
climbing.
continually
Yeah.
before that.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously the economic news prior to the election was pretty darn good.
Yeah.
And the market, I guess, was just responding to that. And employment's up, unemployment's down, growth isn't up, but incomes of higher income people have been going up. And yeah,
I had another question.
Yeah.
Who are you defining as elites?
it's not so much who I define as the
Well, I'm not trying to...
But yeah, you know, okay, I'm going to throw that back to you. Who would you consider to be part of the elite in America?
You are part.
Absolutely. I'm a university professor. I'm a privileged person.
The people in power are the
Huh?
elites.
Pardon?
The people in power are the elites.
Political people, you mean?
Political, economic.
Okay.
To
So
some
the business,
mainstream
their
people.
business definitely has part of the elite thing wrapped up. Who else? Yeah.
Mainstream media.
Media is good. Higher education people generally are part of the elite. Higher income people.
Government bureaucracy.
Government bureaucracy, or what President Trump calls the deep state. So these are not just the bureaucrats, but the bureaucrats that control the bureaucrats, I guess. But yeah.
Major coastal cities.
Yeah, no, definitely. If you look at the pattern of election in 2016, the major urban areas voted against Trump. The rural areas voted for Trump. And so there's definitely a city versus countryside thing going on there. Yeah.
I just wondered, how do they always square the fact that if they're anti-elite,
Uh-huh.
they're also very much pro-American exceptionalism? Isn't that kind of contradictory? That how do you become exceptional with elites?
Well, that's a complicated question. Somebody else would help me out here. No, I mean, if you think that America was created by people, but people inspired by God and blessed by God to create that shining city on the hill, that's right at the core of American exceptionalism. That is, we're not corrupt and polluted like the Europeans are. And but if you get a lot of non-ex-Europeans, see what I'm saying? Yeah. And so there's.
But at the same time, they would hate the Googles and the Microsofts because all American elites. These are things.
Yeah, but they're in that little Switzerland-like state, California, which voted, provided a 3 million, extra popular vote for Hillary Clinton. So yeah, they're not the people. And I mean, was it Donald Jr. who said, "I don't consider those people to be people"?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is about 2 weeks ago. That's really very reprehensible thing to say.
How can a group of people who are elite themselves
Yeah.
present
Exactly.
that they are there to represent the little guys
Boy,
and
that's a really good question.
Can you repeat the-
this movement, when in fact then they are the elites and the whole power section of that party is elite. I don't really...
Okay, so the question is, if you're a member of the elite by power and wealth or whatever, and you're representing yourself as a representative of the non-elites, how do you get away with that?
I know. Duplicity.
Well, I mean, but there has two sides to you have to have a credible,
Yeah, that's true.
you have a credible story and people who are believing you, right?
Yeah.
And obviously the core supporters of, in this case, Trump, do believe him and think that he really is representing them, and sort of regardless of what he does. Yeah.
And I don't think you can leave out the fact that there were a lot of people who were just plain anti-Hillary Clinton. Who voted for
Absolutely.
Trump because they just did not like her or wanted the Republicans to be in control of next Supreme Court nominee, and that was the best way to accomplish it.
Yeah, and there were a lot of, that last part is sort of traditional Republicans, and yeah, they were willing to accept some of the things they didn't like about Trump in order to oppose Hillary. And there were people who voted against Hillary because they didn't want a female president, too. You know.
To what extent would the feeling of no more the same, I'll take somebody different, be a factor?
Yeah.
Less, more so than I don't want a woman or I really like Trump.
The more so part, I don't know whether I agree with, because it's hard to get the evidence to say that this mattered more than that. But we do know that people who voted both for Bernie and for Trump wanted something different, and they didn't see Hillary, or for that matter, Trump's opponents, as something different. So yeah, that's definitely true. Okay, and I like this little cartoon here. It says, this is the global elite, which is an octopus with its arms around the earth, and two of the arms have been chopped off, and says, what the hell? The PVV, the Dutch Freedom Party, won a considerable number of seats in the parliamentary election in 2017, which is bad news for people who are against the right-wing populists, and then Macron beat Le Pen in France in 2017. And there's been for the last 3-4 weeks, there have been stories saying, hey, this is good news, and there are other stories that say, hey, this is bad news because look at how much votes she got. And the news is better than we feared. Let's see. Okay, so I wanted to talk about, I'm a political scientist, and so what we do is try to figure out why people vote, or why people have attitudes that they have. And there have been a bunch of explanations, which we talked about already. You suggested some of these already, so I'm just going to be reviewing this for some of you. Slow economic growth has definitely played a role in the rise of these parties. So since the economic crisis of 2007, 2008, everybody in the industrialized West has experienced slower growth. And not only have they had slower growth, but the rate of recovery from the big recession that occurred in that period was fairly slow. In the case of the in case of both the United States and Europe, measures to stimulate the economy were opposed by conservative parties, but also, just generally, it was a very deep recession, and so the recovery was relatively slow. And the unemployment has not come back, and income inequality has increased in all the countries. So that's a huge factor. As a result of that, but also because of other things, people in those countries became more dissatisfied with their democratic institutions. In the U.S., what do you think makes people most unhappy about our democratic institutions?
Don't get anything done.
Yeah, we've got very partisan politics. Very polarized publics as well as parties. And as a result...
Money?
Pardon?
Influence of
money is a very big factor, especially in the U.S. What do people who are mad about the money influence want to change about our policy?
Taxes.
Well, yeah, taxes. I mean, we've always been unhappy about our taxes.
Citizens United.
Citizens United, which allows business interests and others to assemble big pots of money and influence elections.
Inequality in pay.
Yeah, and that was, the huge issue in the case of Bernie Sanders, but then Hillary sort of took that up later and rode with it for a while. Pardon?
gerrymandering.
Oh, yeah, gerrymandering. Yeah. Here in Indiana, we have particularly bad trouble with gerrymandering. My current representative had his district redefined in such a way that there's no possibility for a Democrat to get elected, and so everybody in Bloomington has been affected by gerrymandering, basically. Almost everybody, anyway. We also have low social mobility and high inequality, like I said before. And there's been a certain rise in anti-globalization sentiments. And one of my colleagues tells me that the people in general don't have that strong opinion on globalization per se. It's too abstract a concept. But people do get mad at the fact that factories close down and move to Mexico, or new jobs are created in China instead of the United States. And that was an issue that obviously President Trump rode to victory, and it was also an issue for Europeans. Then there's the rise in immigration rates and flow of refugees. That has been a fairly recent phenomenon in the last few years. Okay. And then now we have the issue of the support from Russia. And obviously that's not as big as these other factors, but it's still a factor. You know, you've got to worry about the future of your democracy. Of course, Mr. Putin is right. The United States does get involved in influencing other countries' elections. That's absolutely uncontestable. And including in Europe, we do intervene occasionally in European politics. But anyway, that's become an issue. So I've got another cartoon here. This is the cow of Europe being fed green stuff by austerity and maintenance of the mainstream parties. And here's the populist parties milking the cow for the milk that's come from the result of feeding over here. So that's a causal argument. I like that. Cows, the symbol of Europe, is nice. Okay, so what are the causes of the sluggish growth? I think I already telegraphed this. Contraction of economies following the financial crisis, increases in deficit spending, mostly financed by public debt, particularly in the most deeply affected countries, increasing debt, which results in increased interest rates. That is the premium that they have to pay to borrow, especially in the weaker economies, austerity policies, and then the delayed restructuring of sectors that continue to drag down the overall economy, which is exactly what newly elected President Macron is trying to deal with. He wants to restructure the French economy. The French economy has not done well during this period, although they're still pretty rich. But there's been a lot of unemployment in industrial regions. It's really not that different from us. This sort of attempt to reform from the center or the right is a bit problematic, but nevertheless, we'll see if they can do it. Then there's the refugee crisis. So the worst phase of this began in 2015, pretty much coterminous with the increasing failure of the Syrian government, the involvement of the Iranians and through Hezbollah and the Sunnis to make that system, that civil war, even worse, but also the policies of the Syrian government itself. Anyway, we see a huge increase in asylum seekers from Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq, obviously for reasons of war, primarily, or the delayed effects of war. The largest number of asylum applications were in Germany. I think, was it 800 to 900,000 at least? It's just short of 1 million people. And the Germans are being asked to absorb these refugees in various places, doing a pretty damn good job up until now, but I think the Germans have started to say, no more, we can't absorb more. I think there was a recent story about Sweden, where Sweden has also been fairly good about absorbing refugees, and they have pretty good policies, but they have their limits too. So this has become an issue throughout Europe and in the United States. Germany. Turkey has accepted 2 million Syrian refugees. And this is part of what's going on in Turkey, that you have a lot of support for President Erdogan, who's been not particularly a good ally of late. He's not happy with us because we're supporting the Kurds in attacking the Islamic State, and he doesn't like that. But he also has become more and more authoritarian and clamped down on people that he sees as a political threat. But part of the reason that they're having problems is because of this refugee crisis. The European Union made a deal with Turkey in 2016 to send Greek asylum seekers to Turkey in exchange for a big aid package and to accelerate negotiations for membership in the EU. I haven't been following this. This is a slide from last year. I don't know what happened to this. I think EU-Turkey cooperation has gone down, just as U.S.-Turkey relationships have not improved. And it makes you wonder again about who was the National Security Advisor? Mr. Flynn. He was representing the Turkish government, paid representative of the Turkish government, even while National Security Advisor. So, that's going to come around again. All right. What are the factors that political scientists and sociologists say influence anti-immigration attitudes? Well, obviously, if you're unemployed as a result of being displaced, in your mind at least, in your profession by immigrants, that's going to make you pretty anti-immigrant. Even if you're not displaced for that reason, but somebody has told you that you've been displaced for that reason, you could be anti-immigrant. And there's been a lot of manipulation of people that way. Generally, low socioeconomic status people, low-skilled people are also anti-immigration because they see their job, their potential jobs being taken away from them by immigrants. And then there's youth, and particularly in Europe where youth unemployment is much more important than it is here. That tends to make them anti-immigrant. Yes.
What about crime?
Yes. I don't think there's a way they can test that specifically, but yes, I mean, we've seen a lot of reports in the press that places where immigrants are associated with crime, whether they actually are committing crimes or not.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
being publicized.
Well, and then you have candidates and parties specifically connecting immigration and crime. So, that's what you call a manipulation of perceptions rather than necessarily an actual phenomenon. And in the United Pardon? Pardon?
Would you call it
I don't like the term myself. I never like the term terrorism either for similar reasons. When you can use a concept as a political football easily and sometimes incorrectly.
What about religious discrimination?
Yes. Okay. So we've already talked about the anti-head reg, also the anti. What's the head
Hijab.
anti-hijab policies? We had remember the burkini incident? Has anybody actually seen a burkini? Well, what do they look like?
A lot of clothing.
A lot of clothing at the beach, sort of like what American women would wear in like 1890. More than, but also covering the eyes. Yeah, burqa means just the eyes.
I went to parochial schools where a lot of the Catholic nuns had strange outfits too.
Right. Yeah,
There was never a sense of, discriminating them because they weren't the other.
Yeah, isn't that weird?
Yeah.
Of course, yeah. Who cares what people wear at the beach? I mean, it's such a stupid issue. But anyway.
What about reluctance to assimilate?
Oh yeah, I think that's played well, especially at the level of rhetoric. So if you have people, reluctance to assimilate. It's a tough way because there's the opportunity to assimilate as opposed to the desire to assimilate, right? And many groups, part of. Okay. Can anybody tell some stories about this that they? Yeah.
Well, it takes a generation or more.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm from Minnesota, and in St. Paul, they had a huge Hmong community that came over after Vietnam. And 20, 30 years ago, there were a lot of Hmong gangs in the central Twin Cities area because they were the outsiders. Well, now we have Hmong college professors, we have Hmong,
Right.
Hmongs on the state legislatures and stuff like that. It just-
And that's America. I mean, a big difference between us and Europeans, frankly, is the time that it takes to become assimilated, and the costs that are paid are much lower than they are in Europe. I hope I'm not offending anyone. Yes.
You know, if you look at this list of the things we're bringing up, you could look at the United States in the 1900s and the 1920s. You know, where we were very anti-immigration, and the same stuff was happening, and everybody was segregated. I come from New York, and everybody was segregated in Manhattan. It was Little Italy, all the Chinatown, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure you've seen Gangs of New York. And maybe you haven't, but anyway, it's a movie about exactly that issue. You have what are called nativists in American history against recent immigrants. In that case, it was the Scotch, Irish, English immigrants versus the more recent Irish immigrants. And I say Scotch Irish. I include this. I disinclude them. But and we've had many episodes of nativism in the United States, including here in Indiana. So, in fact, one of my neighbors used to be a nativist. But also, you know, it gets redefined. You know, if you didn't grow up in Indiana, you're a foreigner. And,
Yeah.
don't get me going on that. All right. But yeah, we have a tendency, and you know, I like to think of it as tribalism comes to the Western industrialized world. You know, you don't belong to the tribe, therefore I have to treat you the same, and I definitely don't have to provide you with social welfare benefits and blah, blah, blah. You know, it's a kind of thinking that I think we as Americans generally don't like. I mean, so we have that whole melting pot myth, which a lot of historians have been talking about lately, that this whole idea that all these minorities, or all these people who came from elsewhere, were quickly integrated into American society. Well, a lot of recent history has been debunking that. But on the other hand, we have that sort of idea that we can all get along, that we have enough in common, and so forth. Yeah, all right. Yes?
There's an excellent book called Strangers in Their Own Land, and the Rise of, and the author makes the point that a lot of people who would use the right populace think that other people are cutting in line.
Ah, yeah. Right.
You know, and they're being pushed further back.
Yeah. So if you're I have a friend who's African American, and he calls this the idea of white privilege. Okay? And I think that has played a role in our recent politics. So the idea being, if you got here earlier, you deserve better stuff, right? And better treatment in general. And what's the Louis C.K.
Yeah.
Did you see him on Saturday Night Live? And he was saying how he was complaining about the fact that his laundry wasn't ready when he expected it. Sorry, I can't even tell you what's in. But anyway, he says my laundry's not ready, and it should be because I'm white. It turns out he never turned his laundry in. But, that's a little bit like what we've been seeing a lot of lately. And okay, I'm going to move on. Then there's what people call supply side factors, and this is straight political science. And that is, those Europeans, they have their multi-party systems and coalition governments, and none of this single winner and two things. So we know from long-term study that the combination of multi-party systems with proportional representation, that's where your representation in the parliament depends on the proportion of the vote that you get. You combine those two, those are fairly accepting of diverse political ideologies and diverse political parties. And so the chance for an extremist party to rise is greater. The entry cost of being an extreme party, either left or right, is a little bit easier. It's not as costly as it is in the two-party system. But those people also argue that when the mainstream parties, they tend to converge anyway over time because they're competing for that, big bulk of voters in the middle, unless the voters are polarized. But anyway, the theory is that the parties will converge because they're trying to get people to defect from the other party. Okay? And so they begin to sound more and more alike. But it turns out that when they do that, people tend to get disgusted with those mainstream parties and vote for other parties, that are not similar to those parties. So populist parties would definitely would benefit from that kind of convergence. So that's one of the analyses that political scientists have done. All right. So I'm getting ready to conclude, and I'll take a few questions after this, but this is what I wanted to argue. I basically thought when I started this talk, it was going to be kind of bleak and pessimistic and stuff. But I didn't really come out of it that way. I see there's a lot of robustness to democratic systems. I don't see well, with some exceptions, I guess Poland and Hungary are not doing so well in terms of democratic institutions, and Turkey is obviously not doing that well either. But in the case of most of them, these parties are still not powerful enough to, although they affect the policies that are being adopted, they don't, generally speaking, rule any of the countries that they're operating in. In Europe, supporters of right-wing populist parties are anti-immigrant and anti-EU, and that is one of the really very unfortunate effects of the rise of populist parties, is that they're Euro-skeptic, but also that there's a lot of ethnocentrism that's sort of being permitted as a result of this anti-immigrant position. The anti-Islamic views are particularly important, I think, in Europe, but I think we're increasingly seeing that the U.S. is imitating the Europeans here, which is weird because we have a much smaller Islamic population. Our Islamic population that we have is very mainstream.
And spread out.
And spread out, exactly. How many of you grew up in communities where there were Islamic people in the community? Yeah, I mean, in my hometown in western Pennsylvania, we had Lebanese, Syrians, a lot of small business people, and they've been there for, gosh, at least 100 years. And if you look at, let's see, what's that? Oklahoma.
Yeah.
There you go. Oklahoma, the guy who's selling stuff and romancing the girls is from the middle. Pardon? Is he Lebanese? Persian. Yeah, right. I think it's yeah. In Oklahoma.
Not the state.
Not the state.
Okay. Very good. All right. So, but anyway, this, as I was saying, the optimistic side of this is these parties had too few voters until recently to form their own governments or elect heads of state, and they are worrisome. The anti-elitism, the ethnocentrism, the anti-democratic elements in those parties are worrisome for the future of democracy. But I see this very much as contingent on the rather bad economic results we've had for the last now 10 to 15 years. It's that very slow recovery from the deep recession of 2007 to 2008. And we seem to be coming out of it in the U.S. The Europeans are not doing too bad, by the way. They're growing faster than they were. So, fingers crossed. This may be a phenomenon that we don't have to live with for too long. Yes?
How much of the phenomenon is based on economic growth and lack of same versus inequitable distribution of wealth?
That's a great question. I can give you extra credit. I have no idea, but it's quite possible, and I think there's a big segment. I mean, when you think about America, where was Trump support? People who feel like they've been left behind, they have to take on 2 or 3 jobs to get the income they used to have. Their kids graduate from college and can't get good paying jobs, or they're part of what the so-called gig economy. And you know, that whole thing about the coal miners, though, that one totally popped up.
Yeah, that's weird.
The coal miners, I mean, their jobs, coal mines are not going to come back because somebody says they're going to come back. Yeah, I grew up around coal miners in western Pennsylvania, so it's not like I don't know. Yeah.
And how about with aging population? That's the biggest problem with the industrial states these days.
Oh.
I think last year Japan sold more adult diapers than baby diapers. And the U.S. is going for that, as is Europe. Well, need immigration. Because everybody...
Don't you, as a senior, don't you like your market power? Though?
Yeah. But who's going to take care of me?
Yeah, that's right. When your kids have the income, they take care of you when you're no longer capable of doing it. I'd say it saves a lot. Yeah.
I made reference to the populist movement in the United States in the late 1800s.
Yeah.
And it seems like these movements don't last all that long, does it?
Well, that one was real short. I was really surprised. I hadn't really read up on it. You know, I knew from American history about the movement, and I knew about the cloth of gold and all that. But
They have waves periodically, but they seem to just burn themselves.
yeah, I mean, part of the problem with populism is that it's a rather vague ideology. It says the elites are bad, and the people are right, and then it's like a big blank space. So what do we do about it, right?
You give them a slogan.
I guess, but you know, slogans are dangerous. You know,
It worked for this one.
it did work. It did work. Although I can't say there's been a lot of accomplishment. Right? Yeah. The people who support these guys don't really care about that. It's the symbolism. Yes.
Can you give some other examples of left-wing populism besides Bernie Sanders?
Well, there's the Syriza party in Greece, which didn't have power for that long, but it still did what it thought its supporters wanted to do, oppose the austerity measures, oppose them. Let's see, Podemos in Spain has been quite important in, again, opposing austerity, but also kind of giving voice to people who've been left behind, and including very high youth unemployment in Spain. So that's been left wing.
Did you put the Orange Revolution in the left wing populism?
Well, you know, that's independence from, I mean, right? The Orange Revolution is getting out of the...
Isn't it also like
Russian
anti-oligarchy and pro-people?
The Ukraine is a problem because, you know, do you ever watch the interview with Putin yesterday? I highly recommend it, even though it's Oliver Stone and the guy... Yeah. No, but not because it's Oliver Stone, but because Putin actually gets a chance to say what he thinks, much of which is completely wrong-headed, but at least you get to hear a chance to hear him say it. And
it wasn't an interview; it was just a platform for Putin.
But yes, that's true. But he does talk about the idea that Russians got stuck overseas after the breakup of the Soviet Union, and there were a lot of Russians in eastern Ukraine. And a lot of the rationale behind Putin's policies toward Ukraine is precisely that. There are a lot of Russians in Crimea, too, by the way. So, yeah. And that has echoes of the Nazi era, actually. You know, when like the Sudetenland, Hitler wanted to reincorporate those German people into the homeland. Unfortunately, a lot of Russians agreed with Putin on that, and so he kind of got away.
He's having riots now, though.
Oh yeah, that feels good. Although they say that apparently the guys who support the opponent is like 2% of the
Who's in
vote.
jail.
Yeah, who's in jail, right? Right. He doesn't seem to well, anyway. Go ahead.
Could you comment on Switzerland? I haven't followed it or anything, but I know they banned minarets.
Oh yeah, that's right. They did.
Everybody was shocked because that's like the first thing that came out.
That's so anti-Swiss.
Well, you know,
I don't know. It gives me creeps.
Yeah, that's pretty much.
Well, okay, yeah. Out there in the boonies in Switzerland, there are a lot of.
I mean, if you look back on some of the history
Yeah.
that they did during Nazi Germany, I mean, it makes you cringe.
A lot of retired ones.
I don't know. I have trouble. First of all, I have a lot of Swiss friends, and I like the country overall. Chocolate is wonderful. Yeah, there they are in the middle. The good thing for them is big mountains that are difficult to cross.
Yeah.
And sending everybody out to shoot their automatic weapons every weekend. You know. And then they have some great carnivals. No.
They have 4 languages, they have 4
Yeah.
groups of people. You would think that they would be very, let's let everybody live, but not.
I don't know. I mean, they're as vulnerable as anybody is to that. So there's probably quite a lot of inequality in Switzerland too. It's a very expensive place to live. It's a very extensive welfare state. That's quite respectable. They did their health insurance thing the way we should have done it. Yeah, they basically said insurance companies can't make money on health insurance. They can make money on all other kinds of insurance. But they're just going to charge people what it actually costs. Buy health care. Doesn't it seem incredibly idealistic, but it actually kind of works there. And they have very high quality medical care, as you can imagine. So, yeah.
Do you want to make some comments about Brexit? Do you think it will or stop? Or?
I mean, you would think that the Conservative Party would get the message that maybe it's a good idea. I mean, so what might happen? The Scottish have been saying we're going to exit the UK.
Yes, they lost a lot of seats at the last election.
The Scottish Nationalists.
Yes, they lost 23 seats, and it has actually rendered them quite impotent.
But hasn't the Labour Party come out against Brexit too? I think they weren't particularly negative about Brexit during the election, but since then...
I don't know, I'm not so sure about that.
Since they got a lot of votes from young people who are against Brexit, it may be that part... So, I'm just speculating. I think the general view after the vote was, well, people have spoken, we've got to, even though it's like 51, 53%, I forget the exact amounts, said we've got to do this now. But with Theresa May on the out, the Conservatives struggling to maintain their majority, I don't know. I think things are up in the air. I'm being hopeful here, because I think Brexit is a disaster. And it's still waiting to happen. Yeah.
Along those lines, is there any incentive for enlightenment where they say, we need to support our neighbors, we need a solution in the Middle East so that we're not overwhelmed by these problems? An international movement instead of a national movement?
Who is supposed to have this?
Yeah, in all of
everybody, right?
Yeah, well, especially Europe, because they're the ones that are getting all these the unstable countries in the Middle East. They're close. They get to them.
You're absolutely right. They feel much more vulnerable than we do because the people who make it across the Atlantic are fewer in number, more resourceful, and then of course we've got extreme vetting. So we're okay. That's a local issue. In Indiana, the Republicans want to keep the immigrants out, right? Did they succeed, by the way? No. Good. And then we got sanctuary cities. That's kind of sad. I mean, it would be better for the world if the Syrian government or the Syrian situation could somehow be peacefully ended, or at least ended in quasi-peace, so that people didn't feel like they had to leave there to live. Yeah, that's obvious. The Trump solution is to get behind the Russians and support the Syrian government. I'm sorry. I think that's pretty stupid. But, that's me. You know how I voted. Any final other 5 questions? Otherwise, we're done.